There were 170 of these swords found across northern Europe, and every single one of them was obtained through a crime punishable by death. Not by the Vikings who carried them, but by the men who sold them. That's where this story starts, and once you understand it, almost everything you thought you knew about Viking weapons falls apart. Because here's what competing history channels almost never tell you. The Vikings didn't have a list of forbidden weapons the way a modern government bans certain firearms. Norse law was not that simple. The same sword, the exact same blade, could be completely legal on a Monday and a capital offense by Tuesday night. The same axe could mark you as a respected warrior or strip you of every right you had as a human being. What changed wasn't the weapon. What changed was who used it, where, when, and how. Norse law was obsessed with three things: honor, transparency, and social order. Violate any of those with a weapon in your hand, and the law didn't just punish you, it erased you. And in a society where your identity, your legal standing, and your physical safety all depended on your place in the community, being erased was worse than being killed. So let's go through 10 weapons the Vikings carried anyway. Some were legally banned. Some were condemned by the church. Some were ruled out by the logic of Norse honor culture itself. And at least one of them may have been buried by the historical record, because the archaeology still cannot find it. Starting with the one that kicked off an international arms trafficking network stretching 1,000 miles across medieval Europe, the Ulfbert sword. If you've seen one of these in a museum, you remember it. The blade bears a stamped inscription, +VLF-BERH+T. For a long time, historians assumed it was a maker's mark. But the real story is stranger than that. These swords were made from high-carbon crucible steel, a manufacturing process so advanced it wouldn't be rediscovered in Europe for another 8 centuries. The steel came from furnaces in Central Asia or the Middle East, traveled up through Volga trade routes, and was worked in Frankish Rhineland workshops. The result was a blade that was lighter, stronger, and more flexible than anything contemporary European smiths could produce. It didn't shatter, it bent and snapped back. In a shield wall where your sword shattering meant your death, that was not a minor advantage. Here's the problem: the Franks knew exactly what they had. In 811 AD, the Capitulare Bononiense specifically prohibited the clergy from supplying arms to non-Frankish peoples. Then in 864 AD, Emperor Charles the Bald escalated hard. He made the penalty for selling weapons to Norse warriors death. Not a fine, not exile, death. And yet, 170 of these swords have been recovered. 45 in Norway alone. They kept coming, because the Vikings wanted them too badly and the profit was too high for traders to refuse. But here's the angle almost nobody talks about. Some scholars now argue the arms embargo may have directly pushed Viking raiding to intensify. Close off the trade route, and the most efficient way to acquire the best weapons in the world is to take them from the men already carrying them. The Franks tried to keep good swords out of Viking hands. The Vikings just started attacking the people who had them. The ban didn't stop the Ulfbert from reaching Scandinavia. It just changed the acquisition method from commerce to violence. Now, what about a weapon that was possibly erased by history itself? The Atgeir. Every major saga mentions it. Brennu Njal's saga, Laxdela saga, Erbygja saga, all reference this long-shafted polearm as a prestigious weapon capable of both thrusting and cutting, with a blade substantial enough to cleave through enemy spear shafts. Warriors in the sagas carry them with pride, great deeds are built around them, and then you check the archaeology. Nothing. No confirmed datable specimen from the Viking Age has been identified. A peer-reviewed study published in 2019 concluded the Atgeir was almost certainly a 13th century literary invention, a weapon the saga writers projected backward onto an earlier heroic age that may never have used it. Either every single Atgeir was destroyed and left no trace across 300 years of Scandinavian burial sites, or the weapon is at least partly a myth. The warriors claim to carry it. The sagas are packed with it. The ground has never confirmed it. That's a different kind of forbidden, not illegal, not dishonorable, just possibly not real, and yet persistent enough in the cultural memory that it shaped how Norsemen thought about elite combat for generations. But let's get back to weapons that were explicitly banned. The next one involves a psychological state, not just a blade. Berserker weapons. Everyone knows the berserkers, the warriors who fought without armor, bit their shields, entered a dissociative battle frenzy that made them reportedly immune to pain. What most people don't know is that berserksganga, the act of going berserk, was eventually criminalized. In Norway, Jarl Eirik Håkonsson outlawed berserkers around 1014 to 1015 AD. The Icelandic Gragas law code explicitly made going berserk a criminal offense, and the reason they were banned tells you everything about how Norse law actually worked. In wartime, berserkers were useful, terrifying, worth having on your side, but in peacetime, they were a disaster. A man who could legally fly into a combat frenzy held enormous social power. Berserkers started using the threat of holmgang, formal duels, to seize land, cattle, and women from farmers who had no realistic chance of beating them. It was extortion with legal cover. The frenzy itself wasn't the crime. The crime was what they were doing with it. And so the law did something remarkable. It banned the psychological state, not the weapon in the hand, the state of mind. The Lewis chessmen carved around 1150 to 1200 AD show berserkers biting their shields, well into the period after the bans. Visual proof that the archetype didn't vanish when the law said it should. They kept going berserk, they just did it illegally. And speaking of things that got banned because people kept abusing them, the holmgang duel. The holmgang was a formalized system for settling disputes through single combat. You were challenged, you showed up, you fought on an oxhide cloak staked to the ground. 3 shields per fighter. Once all 3 were destroyed, you stood on the cloak and defended with your weapon alone. No backing up, no evasion. The rules were designed to guarantee that someone got hurt. For most of Viking Age Scandinavia, that was the point. It was a controlled mechanism for resolving grievances without pulling in the whole community. Then professional duelists cracked the system. Challenges started going to farmers, men with property but without fighting skills, as a way to strip them of land and wealth through combat they couldn't win. Legalized robbery in everything but name. The practice became so abusive that a single duel triggered direct legislative action in Iceland. The duel between Gunnlaugur Ormstunga and Harafn Önundarson, fought around 1005 AD, both men killed, was apparently the final straw. Iceland banned the holmgang in 1006. Norway followed under Jarl Eirik between 1014 and 1015. Did it stop? The sagas reference holmgang challenges well into the Christian period. Warriors kept issuing them. The ban just meant everyone involved was now an outlaw. The blades hadn't changed, the law had. And the men carrying those blades apparently found that an acceptable trade. Now here's one that doesn't involve a specific weapon at all. And that's exactly what makes it worth understanding. Any weapon used as a murder weapon. Under Norse law, killing someone was not automatically a crime. What mattered enormously was the distinction between vig, an open killing, legally defensible, and mord, covert killing, the crime of murderers and cowards. Kill a man in daylight, in front of witnesses, after announcing a formal grievance. That's vig, legally complicated, potentially requiring compensation payments, but navigable within the social system. Kill the same man at night, kill him while he slept, burn him inside his house, kill him without declaring it to witnesses within a legally defined time frame. That was mord, and the weapon you used was completely irrelevant. The same sword that was honorable in morning sunlight became a murder weapon at midnight. The same axe, the same spear. The crime wasn't the instrument, the crime was the cowardice of the method, and the penalty was full outlawry. Social death. No legal standing, no rights. Anyone could kill you without consequence. Multiple saga accounts document exactly these nighttime attacks, ambushes, and burnings in vivid detail. The horror in those narratives is never about the weapon. It's always about the dishonor of the act. Which brings us to a weapon forbidden not by law, but by geography. Any blade drawn at the Thing assembly. The Thing sites, the great open-air legal assemblies held across Scandinavia, Iceland, and the Norse-settled British Isles, were marked off by hazel poles driven into the ground. Inside those poles sat the frigada, the peace enclosure. Drawing a weapon inside the frigada was not just a violation of law, it was an attack on the legal order itself, an act of political intimidation against the entire assembly. Archaeological digs at thing sites have found the socket holes where those hazel poles were set. The physical boundary was real and deliberate, and the Norse had a physical enforcement mechanism that tells you everything about how seriously they took this. The fridbund, peace straps, that bound swords inside their scabbards before men entered the enclosure. Those straps existed because men kept trying to draw anyway. A legal dispute could flare into a physical confrontation in seconds, and the thing site was the highest stakes arena in Norse society. Land, inheritance, murder charges, blood feuds, all of it settled in a space where weapons were, in theory, forbidden. Multiple sagas describe men drawing blades at thing sites during heated disputes, during verdicts that went against them. The straps didn't always hold, and when someone drew, the legal consequences were immediate. Outlawry, the man who drew a weapon where law was supposed to rule, had placed himself outside the law entirely. Now let's talk about someone who couldn't legally carry a weapon to begin with. Thralls, enslaved people. Between 10 and 20% of the Viking Age Scandinavian population were thralls, men and women taken in raids, born into bondage, or reduced to slavery through debt. Norse law was explicit: weapons were the exclusive right of free men. A thrall carrying a weapon wasn't just breaking a rule, he was claiming a social identity he was legally denied. The weapon was not just a tool, it was a symbol of legal personhood, and the thrall had none. But here's the exception that throws the whole rule into sharp relief. A thrall who took up a weapon to repel a foreign invasion was to be granted his freedom as a reward. The law recognized circumstances extreme enough to override the restriction, which also meant the lawmakers were acknowledging something else, that thralls were picking up weapons often enough, in enough different situations, that specific legislation was needed to address it. The exception proves the rule was being broken constantly. The crossbow gives us a completely different kind of forbidden, one that came from outside Norse culture entirely. No crossbow evidence has been found in Viking Age Scandinavian burial sites. The weapon existed across Europe, but it doesn't appear in the Norse archaeological record from 800 to 1100 AD in any meaningful way. What shifted that calculus was conversion. As Scandinavia converted to Christianity through the 10th and 11th centuries, Norse warriors entered a world with a whole new layer of weapons restrictions, ones issued by the Pope. The Second Lateran Council in 1139 AD explicitly banned crossbow use against Christians. Earlier petitions to Pope Urban II in the late 1090s had pushed for the ban due to the weapon's supposed brutality. Its ability to punch through chainmail with minimal training, at range, putting killing power in the hands of men who hadn't earned it through years of martial discipline. A pagan Norse warrior carried whatever worked. A Christian Norse warrior was now, in theory, subject to papal decrees about which weapons were morally permissible against fellow Christians. So here's what I want to know from you. Out of all 10, which one surprised you most? Was it the arms trafficking death penalty around the Ulfberht, the thrall exception that earned freedom for defending the homeland, or the idea that the most dishonorable act in Viking culture wasn't killing someone, it was killing them in the wrong way? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. If you found this as fascinating as I do, hit that like button and share it with someone who thinks they already know everything about the Vikings, because I promise they don't know this. Make sure you're subscribed, because the next video goes somewhere even darker. The Norse legal concept of outlawry, what it actually meant to be declared outside all human protection, and the men who survived it anyway. That one is coming soon, and you do not want to miss it.